we're going to give absolute proof that 2,500 years ago, the United States of America was prophesied by Almighty God. It's going to be exciting. I want to invite you to go with me back to the first 8 verses, and let's examine each of these beasts to see if they're recognizable as nations on earth today. Now, I understand that many people have taught, oh, I already know all this stuff. The lion's Babylon, the bear's Medo-Persia, the leopard is Greece, the 10-horn kingdom is Rome. Now, that's been the commonly accepted explanation of this prophecy. And I accepted that when I started studying Bible prophecy. However, I went on to chapter 8, and I noticed in chapter 8 there was a ram fighting with a he-goat. I thought, well, what is this? And I read on down in verse 20 of chapter 8, it tells us who the ram is and who the he-goat is. It says, the ram which thou sawest, having 2 horns, are the kings of Medo-Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Greece. Now, when I saw that, I said, now, wait a minute. Everybody's telling me that the bear is Medo-Persia and the leopard is Greece. But right here in the Bible, it says that the ram is Medo-Persia and the he-goat is Greece. Has God changed his mind from chapter 7 to chapter 8? Or are we missing something? And Daniel chapter number 7, verse number 4. The first beast was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Okay, the first beast was like a lion. When God picked symbols to represent nations, he didn't pick them indiscriminately. He picked symbols that would have meaning at the time of the prophetic fulfillment. Now, can you believe that there's actually a nation on earth today whose recognized animal symbol is the lion? Go to Webster's Third International Dictionary. Under lion, it says a symbol of a country, Great Britain. I remember going to London, to Trafalgar Square, which is the center square of London. And I saw these huge lines looking north, south, east, and west. And then all over London, I saw the lion, because by then I knew that the lion is the official emblem of Great Britain. So then God is telling us that Great Britain is going to be one of the nations that will be on the earth at the time of his second coming. Well, let's look at the next beast then. This is verse number 5. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised itself up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Do you know that there's a major nation today whose recognized symbol is the bear? Now, most of you are ahead of me right now because this one is commonly known. We know that Russia is the symbol of the bear. I'll never forget when I picked up Time magazine, May the 21st, 1984, and there on the front page was this huge grizzly bear. And there's one more thing I've got to tell you. And I've got to tell you about the lion a little bit more, because it states there that the lion had eagle's wings. This is back in verse number 4. And I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth. Now, there's a major nation today whose recognized symbol is the eagle. You probably already got this one because it's on the back of your dollar bill. But the eagle's wings were growing out of the lion. Now, let me ask you, where did the United States of America come from? We came out of Great Britain. That's our mother country. The Bible tells us that the wings that were growing out of Great Britain, our mother country, Daniel said, I beheld till the wings were plucked. He saw the breaking away of the United States of America from Great Britain. Can you believe that he saw the Declaration of Independence in 550 BC, but he never knew what he saw? He prayed to understand it. But also, the Bible says that when the eagle's wings were plucked, it was made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. We have another symbol, the symbol of Uncle Sam.
Now that was a clip of the popular show on probably Daystar. You probably saw it. Maybe if you've seen it on another channel, of The End of the Age with Irvin Baxter. He actually died this past November, and he might have passed, but his program is still living on. And with that is that his interpretation of who the lion, the eagle wings plucked out as being America, and the Russian bear. He goes on to say in a different video that the four-headed leopard, which is the third beast and it has four wings, is Germany, and the third head of the four is the Third Reich of Nazi Germany under Hitler. And then his final view on the fourth beast is that it's going to be the Holy Roman Empire being reunited in the last days. So let's have some fun with this and see if it holds any water today. As we get into Daniel 7 and see its connection with the book Revelation, is that last week we answered these two key questions from Daniel 2 by concluding that the four empires represented in the metals were Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and that the kingdom of God in its full realization, will be with God himself ruling it on earth. Textually, Babylon was named as the head of gold in Daniel 2:38, so there's no disputing that. And also that the fourth empire was determined to be Rome, from looking back at Josephus, looking at John's use of Daniel in his Revelation, and Jesus himself. Plus, the verses about the last days in the New Testament are tagged within the Roman Empire period. Historically speaking, is that we also, just asked was who conquered who and when, and to find out who the second through fourth empires were. The special note about the fourth empire is that it said that it would be divided at some point, and this sealed the fact that Rome was the fourth because it was divided officially in 395 with the Byzantine in the east and the Western Roman in the west. Laying all this out with Revelation is that we have the following. Now, grant you that it's hard to reconcile how could we still in the present day be under Rome as the fourth empire? I get all those kind of questions. I'm not going to go veering off into those because basically they're all speculative possibilities at the end of the day. The best thing that we can do is to dive into Daniel 7 and just keep adding to our understanding and connected it into Revelation itself and see what we can for surely take away from it. So today's main questions are to find out is if Daniel 2 and 7 do align. Do chapters 7 and 8 align? And is America really in the Bible? And then who is the little horn in chapter 7 of Daniel? So let's get rolling in verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove up the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Now the sea in verse 2 is likely referring to the Mediterranean Sea, but then in verse 3, it's more probably speaking about the Gentile heathen nations outside of Israel. In verse 17, Daniel will have his dream interpreted by a heavenly being that says that the beast rose out of the earth. So earth and sea together, basically, they're on the earth empires. Now, the four winds of heaven is probably a little confusing to some, but this phrase can be found 9 times in the KJV, and the other two occurrences in Daniel speak about how Greece will be divided up towards the four winds of heaven that correspond to the four cardinal directions, as do the other verses where this phrase is found. The interesting thing is that since wind and spirit are both translated from the same Hebrew word, is that this could possibly be referring to four spirits, as in angels from heaven, because in Zechariah 6:5 it describes the four spirits of the heavens doing work for the Lord, and in Revelation 7:1, four angels stood at the four corners of the earth holding the four winds of the earth. In both of these books is that they are apocalyptic in nature, and which is Daniel 7 as well. And so this is where I land, is that we are talking about four spiritual beings and not just simply wind in general. But the one thing to note is that the four winds, or spirits of heaven, are not the same, or do they correspond to the four beasts. They are distinct from one another. One group is from heaven, and the other one is from the earth. I only bring that up is because if you were to get into the whole authorship debate, which we talk about just a little bit in here, where the critics do not want to talk about supernatural predictive prophecy, they won't allow that in. They try to merge these so that they can kind of run with their view and paint a false narrative of it. Verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. As just seen, this is where Irving believed America was being referred to. But let's go back and look at this just a little bit more. The first beast is said to be like a lion with eagle's wings on its back. But this beast has its wings plucked up from it, then was lifted up from the earth and made to stand like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So this beast goes through three phases. First, we could say that it was originally unstoppable, as being a hybrid of both the king of the land and king of the air, being part lion and eagle. Then the wings were plucked off, and now so the beast would be limited in facet by what he could conquer. But this beast was even stripped further down by turning him into a gentle beast by giving him a heart of a man to signify compassion. Now, if you know the book of Daniel pretty well, does this sound familiar at all in the total of the book? Faith is nodding yes. Where at, do you think?
I don't remember, but I remember hearing about it.
Okay. I would say that it should remind us of Nebuchadnezzar's madness in chapter 4. Yep, and we'll dive into this a little bit, because he did go through the same three phases. God told him that he had been granted unlimited power, but because of his pride, his power was removed from him and was made to behave as a beast for a period of 7 times. Now, does the word times there mean 7 years or 7 seasons? There's a little bit of debate. But either way, God took him and gave him a brain where he was thinking like he was like an animal and behaving like an animal for a period of 7 times. Then, when he finally humbled himself, God turned his madness back into sanity, which resulted in Nebuchadnezzar praising God at the end of the book. So contextually, I would say that this was what Daniel 7, first beast, was alluding to. Now, symbolically, the winged lion is also known as a griffin and can be seen on many Babylonian reliefs in museums today. You simply will not find this in the London town square. But you might be wondering is if there is actually a Bible verse that flat out calls Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar a lion and or an eagle. And yes, there is. In Jeremiah 49:19 through 22, with God's oracle against Edom, saying that he shall come up like a lion in verse 19, and in verse 22, that he will fly as an eagle. So, who is the he in these verses? Well, it's none other than Nebuchadnezzar himself. As God was punishing Israel, or namely Judah, you would say at this point in history, is that he was using Nebuchadnezzar. You read about that often. Jeremiah kept warning the people, just bow, accept it. You resist, it's going to get worse, because God is using Nebuchadnezzar to punish them for all their idolatry. But at the same time, God was also using Nebuchadnezzar to punish the rest of the nations for mocking and not supporting Israel during that time period either. And for those three reasons is why I, and like Irving said himself, that the consensus scholarship view is that the first beast aligns with the head of gold, which we know as Babylon from 238. But before totally dismissing his view and just accepting what I have to say about it, is let's just go through all of them, going into the second beast now, verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side. And it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise and devour much flesh. So the second beast is described as a bear with one side raised higher than the other with 3 ribs in its teeth. The raised side implies that one side of the beast is stronger, kind of like if you're thinking about like a boxer, they usually stand on one side, and which one's their jab, and the strongest arm is on the back, but, just use that imagery right here. But textually, though, is that if you were to go back into chapters 5 and 6 of Daniel, is that he had consistently spoke about the Medes and Persians as a unified nation when they conquered Babylon. Thus, it would make the second beast the Medo-Persian Empire. When debating critics is that this is the dividing line with them for knowledge's sake because they have to separate Media from Persia and then they can make Greece the fourth. Problem for them is that all ancient Near Eastern historians and reliefs describe the Medes and Persians aligned with one another. And at worst, it has the Persians holding dominance over the Medes. Regardless, they're together. There's no distinction. And like we said, that Cyrus conquered Babylon. And it's just a, I don't want to accept it, ultimately, thing for the critic and atheist in this instance. But either way, we know they are described combined. And not just that, because since the Persian king Cambyses married Princess Mandan of Media, who together had Cyrus the Great, and he conquered the Babylonians in 539, is that you have Cyrus being a king who is part Mede and Persian, which shows a royal alliance between the two as well. And thus, I would say, it shows that the bear is, representing these two combined nations. Also in verse 5 was the description of the 3 ribs in the bear's teeth. Think about a bear in this instance, like I said, was devour much flesh. He's tearing them apart, signifying, conquering, if you will, his prey. And I would say that the 3 ribs can historically be linked to Medo-Persia's defeat of the Lydians, Babylonians, and the Egyptians. Defeating these 3 Near East powerhouses made the Persian Empire the largest one ever recorded in history at that point in time. Now, Irving objected to this because he said that you can't have both the bear and ram in chapter 8 being equated with Persia. And the same goes with the leopard and the goat for Greece. Because in that, what he said was, this somehow makes God changing his mind, and therefore it creates a contradiction. I'm going to tackle that, but for now, I'm saying that the bear does correspond to the silver arms and chest for Medo-Persia. Third beast, verse 6. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So, the third beast is like a leopard that has 4 wings and 4 heads. So, sequentially, this beast then lines up with the thighs of brass. And in regards to this beast's nature is that we know that leopards are extremely fast and swift. And so if you put some wings on its back, it's going to be what? Just Superman type of speed that will be given to it. These details historically match with how the Greek Empire rose to power under Alexander the Great. He started to rule in Macedonia at only the age of 20, and in just 3 years he became the Pharaoh of Egypt, the king of Asia, and the king of Persia. So his empire grew from just Greece all the way through the Middle East in just 3 years. This is totally unprecedented in all of human history, and which is why he gets so much attention, because they say he never lost a battle, and for doing it so fast is like, how could you possibly have done all this? But probably the question about with the symbol is, why does it have 4 heads and 4 wings to it? Well, after his Persian conquest, Alexander died very young at only the age of 33, and in Babylon, mind you, he did die. And since he had no proper succession plan in place, is that the Diadochi Wars ensued for the next 50 years within the empire, and splitting them into 4 ruled territories, which then matches the 4 heads and the 4 directions in which they were split. Thus, the 4 heads are Alexander's 4 generals who took control of the territories, and the 4 wings represent the 4 cardinal directions in which the empire was split into. Historically, these territories, had varying lengths, and we showed that, last week that Rome conquered them eventually over the course of time. So here is my current alignment between 2 and 7. But, like I said, that Irving objected to this because he says that I can't align 7 and 8 together, because that's 2 symbols, and that somehow makes God change in his mind and causes a contradiction. I full-heartedly disagree with this stance for the following 3 reasons. And just to make note is that he was like kind of one of the first that I've ever watched with Revelation, and this was a long, long time ago. So I took the bait early on, and then you actually get into a study and like, oh, okay. First is textual within Daniel itself. And in chapter 8, the ram is flat out called Medo-Persia, like you said. But verse 3 said that one of the horns was higher than the other, which is the same imagery that we see in 7:5 that said that the bear raised one side higher than the other. This is an allusion to one side of the dual nation empire being stronger of the 2. With the ram, it said that the stronger side came up last. This is in reference to the Persian side of the empire, as they would end up being the dominant side of the empire. At the beginning, at the point of the transition, is that the Medes were stronger as a nation itself, and then when they formed that alliance, eventually when Cyrus became the sole ruler, is that the Persian side of it grew to hold more strength or will, I guess, over the other side with the Medes. The next similarity is how the ram is described pushing in 3 directions, while the bear is said to have 3 ribs in its mouth. We remarked how the 3 ribs could represent Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt, and I would say that the ram confirms this, as it said that it pushed towards the west, north, and south. And lastly, both are described as becoming very great by conquering anyone who stood in their way. And if you think about the animal's primary fighting tactic, both of them are basically brute force fighters. Bears just try to win you just by clubbing you. Incredible power. Rams are constantly ramming you. So that's their way of conquering. That's the same way that Cyrus and Persian Empire did conquer nations, was just, let's just keep beating them down, sieging them. We're going to win a war of attrition more than anything. And then in 8:21, it says that the goat is Greece. I'm going to say it's Gabriel who's talking here, continued saying that the notable horn is the first king of Greece, which is Alexander the Great. But here's something that Irving will not bring up, and that's verse 8:22. Now that one being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So the angel identifies the 4 new horns that come up out of the goat as 4 kingdoms that will emerge. And here's the key element to this. It's still out of the Greek Empire. They're not turning into their own empire unto themselves. They're still part of the Greek. So, as just said a little bit ago, is that this would be connected to their 4 territories. Thus, a clear connection can be made between the 4 heads and 4 horns representing both the 4 sub-kingdoms within the Greek Empire. And you even have the 4 wings corresponding to the 4 winds of heaven that represent the 4 cardinal directions by which the 4 kingdoms would be divided up. Is that you can just keep seeing all these data points connecting together. But it's not just their physical descriptions that align together, but also the speed at which they would conquer, with the winged leopard imagery in 7 connecting to the description of the goat not touching the ground. And that's portraying the goat's extreme speed at which it was conquering throughout the Middle East in just 3 years. But there's one description that binds all 3 chapters, including chapter 2, together with that, and that is that all 3 visions describe them ruling over all of the earth, as Greece territorially stretched all the way to India in the east. Now, the second reason why Irving's reasoning was wrong is because people and or nations can be symbolically called 2 different things without it being a contradiction. In Revelation 5, who is somebody who gets called 2 different things? Jesus does. He's called both a lion and a lamb. And ultimately, when you're described with a symbol, is that it's evoking what? Some type of imagery, a description. A picture is worth 1,000 words, basically. And you can give 2 symbols to the same place or person, place, or thing without it being a contradiction. But Irving's own reasoning says that, this is God changing his mind, and this just doesn't make sense, obviously, here. Another example of this is that, we just saw in Jeremiah 49, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, was called both the lion and the eagle. It's just, hey, I won't show you this because it kind of undermines what I'm talking about. I could bring up Israel. Israel itself as a nation was called both what and what? God's virgin bride. Yeah, there's all those. His adulterers. But at the same time, his son. And it's like, okay, well, how do you have both a female and a male? Well, it's symbolic, So I think you get the point with all that. And my final thing that I would say, if Irving was still around, or to anybody that adheres to it, is that I would say, why don't you try being, consistent with your own argumentation? Because somehow he argued against 2 symbols representing, the same nation, while at the same time proving that America was in verse 4 with 2 symbols in it. So in one case you can't do it, but in this case he says you can. And, again, it's self-refuting. I don't know if I'm bursting anybody's bubble with this, but America is not in the Bible. Another verse that gets brought up where they kind of run with this is actually Revelation 12:14, because when we get there, it describes a great eagle helping Israel, the woman, out during the 3.5-year Great Tribulation period. The problem here is that the eagle is actually God himself, because this is Old Testament stock imagery of God protecting Israel, namely like he did in the Exodus, redeeming them out of Egypt. And, I think all of us probably know the song On Eagle's Wings. We've probably heard it enough times, over our life. Sing it? No. There might, if I have a teaching gift, I don't know for sure, but I can tell you I don't have a singing gift. That is without a question. So our second and third questions are answered very clearly. I won't say the first one is quite yet because I haven't covered the 4th beast. So 4th beast, verse 7. After this I saw the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. The 2 descriptions that should catch our eye here are the iron teeth and 10 horns, both of which match the 4th kingdom from the statue in chapter 2. So, regardless if someone tries to object to my alignment of the first 3 beasts, is that you can know without a shadow of a doubt that the 4th beast aligns with the 4th empire because both are being described with the iron language. So you could work backwards if you wanted to with the prior 3 beasts and still arrive at the same alignment. But the data points connect even more between the 4th metal and the 4th beast, because in chapter 2 there was extra attention given to the 4th empire over the other ones. This occurs again in chapter 7, where Daniel is more focused and concerned on what to make of the 4th beast and not really that concerned about the first 3. But the most obvious connection is between the 10 toes and 10 horns that Daniel 2:44 said were 10 kings. And the imagery does point to them ruling concurrently with one another and not like a succession line of 10 kings, like full preterists will say it's about 10 Roman emperors, starting with Caesar all the way to Titus. I know it's 11. I won't dive too hard into that, but pick and choose where do you want to start to make 10, and oh yeah, we got this 11th, but we won't run there. But remember that they were the ones who tried to say that everything in Revelation was fulfilled in 70 AD destruction. We show that this just breaks down when you just bring up where's Christ's second coming, the general resurrection, and we're all still dying, and death is supposed to be eliminated. But why equating the 10 horns with the Roman emperors fails is because of what John says in Revelation himself. The 10 horns are first seen in 12:3 and then 13:1, with the beast coming out of the sea, which obviously is, Daniel 7 in our heads, with 10 horns and 7 heads. Chapter 17 has this occurring 4 times as well, but look at verse 12 a little bit more. The 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive ruling authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. This clearly says that the 10 kings haven't ruled yet. This undermines full preterism, because if you start with Nero, and that's where they date the book, is that you don't have 10 emperors by the point of 70 AD. John also said that their rule will only be for 1 hour. Now I'm taking that as it's denoting a short period of time. It's not going to last long, not literally just hit the stopwatch and 60 minutes later they're out. This simply doesn't work, full preterism that is, because that short period of time is that you have numerous emperors ruling for over 10 years, and you could look at Augustus himself, the first one. Most would say he was the first, other than Caesar kind of. His rule went for 40 years. That's pretty long. That's not 1 hour. And just like, well, that's in relation to Jesus. Like, no, come on, put some context to it. But 1712 even said that they will rule concurrently with the beast. And so their receiving of a kingdom is actually pulling from Daniel 7:24 that says that these 10 kings shall arise together out of the 4th empire for a short period of time. So essentially you have sub-kingdoms here. Now is it 10 because there's 10 horns? Is it 7 because it's 7 heads when you get into Revelation? I don't know, because I'm going to say, hey, it's a future thing that, it's all, we'll see or we won't see. But this is similar fashion to that of the 4 sub-kingdoms of the Greek Empire that arose in chapter 8. You had 4 heads here or 4 horns, but yet it was still part of the same beast or the same empire. So I hope that it's become a little bit more apparent at this point that the traditional alignment of Daniel 2, 7, and 8 is the correct one. It's the one that I do adhere to. I've kind of have lily-padded around before, but dive more into it, and this is where I am at this time. The text history and even the numeric descriptions, if you want to look at that way between all of them, is that they horizontally align together. You got 10 running across for the 4th, you got 4 running across for the 3rd, and 2 for the 2nd. Some might say, hey, you're stretching it just a little bit, but I would say that 10 for sure is going on, 4 for sure is going on in the 3rd, and whether or not agree with the 1st and 2nd, but all we can do here is add 2 more more to this in the coming weeks, but at the same time is that we can add our 10 kings to our Revelation chart as we kind of build this up. Now, just because I plopped it right there is that I don't overread that. I'm not saying anything there. I'm just throwing it in where it kind of gets into that clay period, 10 horns, 10 kings. We do have the mentioning, obviously, in Revelation 12 and 13. But I would think that we can see that he's definitely using Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 here and putting them at the same time period right before the kingdom. Historically speaking, is that, this is the way that I would view it, is that is still out ahead of us, still not to scale. So don't like, hey, if I can measure that gap, that's where Brett thinks, no, none of that. Because I'm going to kind of probably beat up on some other views next week a little bit that have kind of, I would say, abused Scripture as well, trying to make it, into their time period, predicting, dates, which I would not recommend to anybody. But if you took anything away, is that I hope you can see how foolish it is to try to see fulfillment of Scripture from magazine covers and some other things like that. But for next week, we'll pick back up in chapter 7 of Daniel and cover the remaining part of it. Verses 9 through 28 dive hard into the little horn. We see the judgment scene going on in heaven with the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man figure. There's a lot there, and, well, we went through a lot here already. But with that, want to close in prayer, Matt? Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.